Call to order the City Council special session for City of East Grand Forks, Thursday, October 24th, 2017. It's now 5 o'clock. Will the City Clerk please call roll?
Mayor Steve Gander.
Here.
Council President Mark Olstead.
Here.
Council Vice President Chad Grassel.
Here.
Council Members Clarence Fetter.
Here.
Mike Pakshavinsky.
Here.
Sam Riakel.
Here.
Henry Tweeden. Mark Demers.
Does term quorum. Discussion on 2018 preliminary budget. Mr. Murphy, Ms. Anderson.
I listed the big ticket items because we talked about, number one was a plan for projects within fund balance. And so I included in there the arenas, the cooling refrigeration systems, the Blue Line Arena floor. And we've talked about the Civic Center parking lot to the west for many years now. We talked about the Big One Roundabout, which we'd be looking at, the earliest would be 2022 when there's federal dollars available, right, Nancy? 2022? Because we're using 2018. And then if we didn't do the Big One Roundabout, we would still have those federal city sub-target dollars that come in every 4 years. And it's about 800 every year. It might go up to about 850, but it's still, by the time we pay the soft cost and our 20%, it's basically about half of that, so it's 400. So if it goes to 850, it would be 425. So that's something we actually have to plan on basically every 4 years. So I just wanted to have those out there so people can plan for the projects within the fund balance. I guess I also put on there like alternate funding. I know that, I don't know if there's grants to do some of the arenas. I know we applied for the grant to use for the girls' locker room. Other cities have used that for their cooling systems, but there's a limit on it. I think about 200,000. So that's
It's not funded anymore at all.
oh, okay,
It wouldn't get funded in this year's legislature.
okay. So I guess we don't have to worry about that area, but maybe there's other areas. I know at one time we checked with bonding for we put in the bond for roundabout. We also could do an abatement bonding if we wanted, which would be you would pick an area where, say we'd pick an area by the Civic Center and we would get a bond, and then what we would do is we would have to take that area and that would pay for the bond, so we couldn't use those tax dollars for anything else. But that is an option. I don't know if we want to look at sales tax for something.
I would include user fees as a possible option.
Okay. Well, it's just that, I mean, it's such a large ticket item, you're going to hit the users awfully, awfully hard, so, but, a combination of them would be good. Number two, we talked about the South End Bridge. I guess my question is, is there a local share? That was just one of our visions.
Can I, if I could comment on that real quick? Actually, coincidentally, I received a call from Grand Forks yesterday on that. They were looking at wanting to know what our thoughts were on the South End Bridge. Mr. Sandy, the council member over there, is pushing to get a bridge going over there. However, he is looking at the 62nd Avenue. So I expect to hear something from Grand Forks in the near future as far as wanting to know what the City of East Grand Forks opinion is on that. So at this point, we don't have any potential costs on what those would be, but I'm sure there would be a cost share. So it is something that could be moving forward sooner rather than later, if that's the case. So I just wanted to be aware of that.
Okay, then we have, I know there's been talk about The assessment policy, I know we did work on that for new developments. This actually has to do more with reconstruction and the percentage that we have. And I know the big one is 20th and Fifth Avenue, which we have a projected cost of 1.6. And as it is now, the city would actually have to pay about $1 million, but I guess the talk is that the rest to the citizen. I don't know what that rate is something that we think would fly or not, so I just put that out there. And then if we have any other major street repairs that aren't on the state aid system, I know that in 2018, we are using a lot of those dollars for those areas now. Then we go to number 4, which is to bring financial reserves to a target. Right now, at the year 2016, we're at 41%. If you look at, I guess that little page here with all the colors, if we looked at, say, 40% would be a target that everybody agrees on, we would need $4,439,418 to meet that, which just on these numbers would meet that. So I guess we're just asking you what target you would like for department heads to work towards. So, it'd be best if we just could have a number, even a range, between 40 and 45 or 35 and 45, whatever. Number 5, to expand Civic Center West and refurbish the VFW. I included those in number 1. Number 6, restore trust, which we don't have a dollar value on. Number 7, strengthen city-school partnership bond. We don't have a dollar amount on. Number 8, we talked about a long-term master plan for parks, trails, and recreation. And what we did was we put $60,000 into the building, out of the building maintenance fund to do that plan. The guesstimation was 60. And the reasoning behind that is because a lot of the park and recreation has to do with facilities or infrastructure, and so we thought that would actually be a good mix to use that money instead of having it part of our general fund and having to raise tax dollars to do that. Number 9, amend city charter, which we don't have a dollar value on, and number 10, upgrade city facilities, which is actually a large part of 1. So I know, talking with the mayor, he talked about wanting to make sure that our financial reserves were on target and where we wanted to be. He also talked about trying to save some money for those with the fund balance for projects. And so I guess we'd like to have maybe some discussion on what you feel that should be. Because in order for us to come up with a budget or actually to explain what we feel we need, we actually need to know how much we can spend.
David, what is the state requirements for the reserves, or their suggested?
Their suggestions are anywhere from 35 to 50%.
We're at 41 currently, at the end of 16. And at the end of 17, is that going to change?
At the end of 17 is what I actually put on that page, because we actually put $477,000 into it. So that's where the $4,950,000 actually comes from.
What
So,
percentage is that? Again,
So you're saying entering into 18, what will our fund balance be?
Fund balance to expenses?
No, to revenue.
Well, one of the documents says revenue, and one of the documents says expenses, but they say up to 4 or 5 months. I mean, we hit the target either way.
4.9 million to the 11.2 in expenses is 44%.
Carla, for the revenue number, if you're considering our reserve to revenue, did you use the 17 revenue or the 18 revenue?
I used the first page here. I assumed that we would actually get where we said we were going to be, that we'd be on
So the
target.
10%.
Yep, and I added what we ended the fund balance with, which is in the back here.
Yep.
That plus this 477, And then that's where I started the
Yep.
fund balance for 2018.
Yep, and then you compared it against 18 projected revenues.
Yeah, so we just, whatever we had in that front page went on here. So that includes the 136,000 that were in the hole, according to that page.
Yep.
And when you look at this, this is the most that departments are looking at. And I guess every year we had to look and say, okay, we can't do that this year,
And what does the 10% equate to?
It's in there.
For the 10% levy, what does that equate to?
Oh, that equates to the top, which is an increase of $452,800.
I know, but percentage on taxes, 10% levy does
Oh,
not mean,
And that's, I
I just
tried to.
want, people at home can't see
Right.
it, so I just want to make sure it's out there.
Right. And I know we've talked about it many years. In fact, Doug Byron even called me on it, and he at least gets it now where, what happens is that the county actually, we give the county our levy, and then they look to see what our taxable market value is for the city as of a certain date. And so what happens is, I sent in the construction dollars in here because that's how much our tax value goes up. So in essence, everybody's pie to pay the taxes is, if the levy never went up, the pie is getting smaller, your piece is getting smaller. And so you can't reflect at the increase of the percent, because that's not directly what goes on your taxes. So if you look at the history, last year we had a tax increase of 18%, but the properties went from a 5% increase to a 10% increase, so it's about half. So if we were going to be in that same direction, I would guess it would be probably more like 5% on your tax statement. And the good thing about doing that 10% is that if we set that as a preliminary levy, the county will come back with what their guess will be at that 10%. We can see what it is, and then we can decide if that's too high, and we can cut back some more. If it actually was to come back at 10%, I know a lot of people in the room are uncomfortable with that, and just say, okay, how much can we go down and kind of get it so it's not at more than 5%? Or might come in at 5 or 4%, and then people might be okay with that, or they might say, no, we still need to go down 9%. So it's difficult to estimate that. And we can't, and you ask the county and they won't even touch it.
I know it's difficult, and I know we've gone through this
Yes.
conversation the last couple of years. I just want to make sure everybody knows that, who's
Yes.
listening and watching, that when someone says 10% levy, it doesn't mean 10% of your tax. I just want to make sure that's out
Yes.
there, that people understand that, and how that process does work, and how we, at the December, November timeframe, get to that point where we can get the information from the county, and we take a look at it. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that. I think it's very important that people understand that. It's not apples to apples on there, so it's when someone says 10%, it's like, well.
Thank you for actually asking that, so that we could explain. Thank you.
Mayor?
Yeah, I think the goal, at least that I have in mind, is that the individual family would not see an increase greater than 5%, that it would be 4-point-something% increase to the individual family for the city share of their property tax for this year. And of that, a lot of the increase is just what we're saying is growth. And so if the community grows, you have properties coming onto the tax rolls that were not there before. That is how, when we set our levy at that higher number, that's the total dollars collected. And just as Carla said, as the community grows, if the gross levy didn't change, then everybody would actually see a reduction. But unfortunately, they'd also see a reduction in services, because as you grow, you do have more snow to move. You do have, all the city services have to be expanded to cover those new neighborhoods, those new apartment buildings. We're happy to have them. But each of those new properties, new families carry with them a little higher cost for the city operations. And so if you want to have a number in mind as kind of a top end of what I'd like to see, it'd be under 5%. 4-point-something would be my highest number that I would like to see individual families see an increase in property tax.
Can you clarify that if you're talking levy percentage?
Yeah, so that would equate to then close to the 10 that we're talking about.
You're talking 9 or 10% levy.
9 or
not-
10%
Not a
levy
4 or 5% levy.
carries to 4 or 5% for the
Okay, just want to
families.
make sure you clarify.
And we've been back and forth already 5 times on the same page. And what I like about what our staff do, and the department heads are right there with it, they're absolutely to the detail in terms of budgeting. The department heads bring out the detailed information. They have, we see one line on a budget sheet, but they have probably 4 or 5 pages to back that up, which carry to that one line. But the good news is for us as policymakers, we're going to listen to that, we're going to ponder that, we're going to factor all of that in, and yet we have a duty to stay, I think, a little bit at 30,000 feet and say to our residents, as a fair level of taxation for them for quality of life, so they have dollars for hockey skates for their kids and pizzas and all that, the normal stuff that we all have, gas for their car. We just have to make sure we're being fair to them as keeping our cost as low as we can, and yet we do expect services. We want the snow to be removed. We want, the parks to look good, senior center to have their meals, the happy meals of different countries and whatnot. So I think what they're looking for from us, in my estimation, is some general parameters of how we want to operate budgetarily, and then they're fully capable of filling in the blanks of how do we get there inside those broad parameters that we will set.
I think one of the major points, we talk about the reserves. I think that's one thing that maybe we need to decide, are we comfortable with 41 or do we be comfortable with 45, wherever it may be at. So that's one of the ones that we know we can say, okay, this is what we want. I think at 41%, in my mind, I don't have a problem with that. I don't know if Mr. Murphy does, unless you want it to be 50%. I just want you to make sure that what you want for the reserves, that you maybe explain why you want that at that percent, or what are you looking for?
I can certainly answer. I would say we would not, personally, I would not recommend that we go below 40%, and also I would not recommend that we go above 45%. And the reason that I say that is that I have seen it where you can have too much fund balance and too much reserves and I've seen that used against cities, where particularly in grants and funding requests, where why do we need to approve this grant when you have more than adequate reserves to pay for it? So it's almost like being penalized for handling your money too well. If the gross numbers is at 44%, I think that's a perfect spot to be. I would say my recommendation would be no lower than 40, no higher than 45.
I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are on that. If anybody has any comments on the reserve, I'm sure David would like to hear them. And as looking at that, and where we started at a couple of years ago to where right now, I think we've made great strides in that. Which I don't know if anybody else has any comments on the reserve, because I think that's where we need to start to, is with that, then go to everything else. Because if we want the reserves at a certain percentage, that's going to affect where everything else lands.
I wonder what it would look like numerically if we took, say, $100,000 of current revenue, put it into the reserve fund, say $200,000 to create that long-term local transportation fund, those items. I guess it's some of the items up in here, for paving projects, street, if it does come to some street replacement projects for the local share, say $200,000 there, create that fund. And then this is for discussion whether we might put $100,000 into a building fund. We're looking at some of our buildings within the Parks Department, but even here, a paint job or various kinds of building maintenance projects. I understand we do have $250,000 set aside that we're adding that in and taking that out for building maintenance, but it seems to me that down the road we have these building projects. So I guess I would toss that out for our consideration. If $100,000 could go into reserves, $200 into transportation, and $100 into that long-term building maintenance package.
basically you're taking $400,000.
right off the top.
Right off the top.
300.
400.
400.
211.
211.
400.
I think that's what I learned in high school.
To just set aside. It's not going to be spent today, but it is really to be responsible for when those projects come. Just like, and it's back to priority number one, plan for projects within the fund balance.
Building was 100, roads were 200, what was the other 100?
100 into reserves, the regular general fund reserves. As a starting point, just for discussion. Clarence, I know you had an idea also, and I'm not going to try to put words in your mouth, but kind of to be honest and fair with our citizens as to taxation, your goal, one of your goals, I think, is to move some fees away from water and light and just actually show them as what they are, and that is a tax.
That is correct, Mayor. First off, to talk about your reserves, I don't have, the general fund, I mean, you don't have to set that aside. That's in the general fund as long as we come up with a percentage that we want in our general fund. That's going to stay there. As far as for building and roads, I think if we're going to set those funds up, we better have specific lists of items that would qualify to spend that money on. Once we come up with those, then I can determine whether or not I can agree with it or not. As far as my point that you brought up, yes, I'm tired of all the fees on water and light. So if we can get fees off of water and light and bring them back into the general fund budget where they should be, that would be my goal.
To that point, has anybody looked at what that would do to the budget numbers? What would be required to go back in the budget? I was at maybe have.
Well, the expenses are there, it'd be just lower revenues because those fees wouldn't be coming in.
Right, I understand it, but to what that would do, the movement.
Nope, I haven't looked at that. I've
Just
glanced
wondering.
at the figures in the back here a little bit. Some of them are pretty small, I think.
I think I looked, it was like $24 a month, so it'd be, say about $600 per
Households.
household.
So some of them are small. I think in total, like mosquito fee or the Greenway maintenance fee, I think in total brings in $45,000 a year. So I mean, eliminate the fee and just have the expense there. So some of those might total up to $100,000 in a year. The biggest fee on there that I can see is probably the street lights. That's the largest one.
The fire and rescue fee is,
The fire and rescue,
Yeah,
street
that-
light, and then
street light is bigger than that?
the stormwater is $9.
The stormwater isn't, I mean, that's
That's a
based
utility.
on your utilities.
Okay. So
I
you're
think
talking
that's-
just the
that's
special
appropriate to
revenue
have as
ones?
a fee.
Special revenue ones.
And
Yeah,
we
Okay.
can go in steps too, right? You know, what we can handle this year and maybe,
have a goal to get them off of there.
The only one on there that we have more of, I think, a restriction is the Greenway maintenance, because the talk was that could only go to improvements, it couldn't go for other things, so we just have to make sure that stays with it when we do that. Or you'd have more latitude, you could decide, I don't know, you'd have to decide what you want to do with that. That's the only one that really has a restriction on it, besides the insect, where that's just basically for insects.
So does that one even come into the general fund then?
No, they don't. Most of them don't. So the insect fund doesn't, the Greenway fund doesn't. So the street lights and the rescue fee does, those two.
Mosquito?
No, it's a separate fund. And we've actually kept it, I know Jason and I have talked about it, because it has kind of a large balance in it, but who knows where it's going with the Zika virus,
Yep.
and, you know, so we're actually very comfortable where that is, so that we know if, you know, it's been a dry year, but some years will be more, and who knows what bugs are coming.
If we eliminate the fee, we could do it as a budget transfer from general fund over to that fund then? Budget
Just like we
for that
do with,
transfer.
yeah, like the cemetery.
Yep.
We could do that.
Mr. Demers.
Quick question. I've already had a discussion with the mayor and understand where he's going with, I guess, his vision, and I share a lot of his vision and how he wants to do this. But a quick question. You're talking about 400,000 off the top or whatever, but we're looking at already a budget deficit. So how are we planning on getting there?
There was some discussion between a 5 and 10% gross levy increase. Initially, there was a possibility of doing it at 5, and the only thing that made me feel even comfortable considering that, again, that gross levy increase of 10 was the ability to set aside that larger sum in these several different funds, or whatever group of funds that we all can agree to. It is still outpacing inflation for our residents, and if we're going to do that, if we're going to increase our taxation faster than the rate of inflation, then we better have a good reason for it, and that is we still need to set aside some funds for these upcoming expenditures. I mean, they're outlined on these pages, and it would be pretty silly for us not to begin to create the funds necessary, because these things are coming. We could stick our head in the sand and say, well, we'll have to scramble when that day comes, but I'd rather we build toward it. And so it's going to be some belt tightening. We'll be operating in a fairly lean environment, all of us. But I think that's what the people would want us to do, is to stay a little on that lean side. And once again, that's where I would feel okay going to that higher levy amount, is if we are committed to adding those to those funds. It's going to be some belt tightening. I know it is.
The question I have, though, is the current revenue and expenditure summary doesn't include any of those, right?
Nope.
So,
It creates a $500,000 hole plus change.
and that's already at the 10%.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to cut 500,000 to add those in.
Or else I'll have to say those funds are a little unrealistic, which I'm okay with. I mean, it's just a starting point for conversation.
I know we checked last year in personnel, and that's the majority of the top section there. And the change from last year to this year is $484,000. And so majority of that's personnel. I know there is a new position in there, but at 7.4%, that's just basically the increase for personnel, which we don't really have any, variance that we can work with, unless
That
you
includes-
eliminate positions.
And that includes insurance.
Yeah,
or
health
estimated
insurance.
What percentage did you say?
7.4% is, that's what it was
7.4%.
last when we checked. Is-
So
as a whole.
400,000 would be, what, 3.5% already? So, okay, we're done talking. Okay. You're 10% right
Yeah,
there.
so I guess the only leeway we have for cutting back really isn't capital. And the amount on the bottom and the capital is 487. So in essence, we'd have to not say this is year we're not doing any capital, and then you can get your balance. And I hate to say it, but that, really, every year, that's all we have to work with. There's a few changes here and there, but,
Although, even on the salary side, we have to say, though it feels like we don't have a lot of choices, we still do have some choices, though they're hard choices.
That's why, actually, when I gave you July, if you look at the July statement I just handed out, there is a section on the second page on the top. It says Personnel Services. So if you took the 6,325,915 times 7.4%, it comes up to $468,000. And that top section is $484,000.
Carla, one thing I noticed on the general fund revenue side, figure skating and revenues are going from 23,000 down to 2,500.
Yeah, that was
we
in
turning
there.
that
And
over to the club?
I did find those today, so,
It should be 25,000.
yeah. Yeah, and that was, we just, as department heads, we have to get these together quicker. In fact, I talked with one department head, there's no reason when the departments can't start in March or April when the year is over, because I just can't put it together in even a week. And we need time to digest it and pass it around again so everybody can look for the mistakes.
Is there a way, your point, the mayor is there a way to step this over so many years to get to a point where we're comfortable, instead of throwing everything all at once at it?
Yep.
And see what sticks? Is there a way to do a step on this that you would feel comfortable with, and that we could look at making sure that we do make capital improvements, capital purchases, the equipment, whatever it may be? Is there a way or a number that maybe you're comfortable with of starting out at and working up to? Let's say a time
Oh, yeah.
frame of 5 years or 10
We're
years?
gonna all have to be flexible on
Is
this.
that
for sure.
something that, you can look at? Maybe it's
Okay,
25%
so-
of it this year, then
Right.
maybe up to 30%, whatever it may be.
Yep, to build up
Throwing
to that
numbers out
point.
there.
Yep.
I'm not suggesting those numbers, but just kind of an idea of
Okay,
how
so
we
if
can
you
get
look
there.
at the special revenue funds detail, the next second page, I have a recap of the building maintenance fund, kind of out in the middle of the book. And I've kind of done a running total for the next 5 years in there. And, I mean, this is all the information I have on, just on, park shelters are in there, and, roofs. And if you actually go to the end of the year in 2021, this is assuming other things don't come up, there's 621,000 in there. Because we've been actually pretty good about, this is the 250 that comes from Water and Light. And we've been good about, I think most everybody's gotten their heating, air conditioning fixed or getting fixed here soon. I know that City Hall, we're going to do that, but we actually have some CDBG funds that we're going to use to replace those. The library's under control. I know the fire department's done that, so I don't know what other things people have. Yes,
Well, I guess there's a lot of ways of coming at this, and you can find creative solutions to solve the same problem. For example, the Civic Center parking lot, $1.4 million. That's a large parking lot to pave. Does it all have to be paved, or does the stuff closest to the front of the building need to be paved and the rest can be something less than paved? Still a nice parking surface, but do we really have to have that huge area all paved? I don't think so. There's a new business coming in on the corner on 220, and that's not a paved parking lot, but it's a nice surface. And I mean, creative ways of looking at solving the same problem are a way to not only, we shouldn't just look at increasing revenue or using the revenue. We should look at solutions that maybe we haven't thought of before for these and other. That's just one example.
no, that's a great example, thank you. In
Use
fact,
a-
Jason and I can check on that. We'll have Steve, look at that, just so, I know at one time we had checked with federal dollars since, did you keep Hippo Park there? That they would actually pay for part of it, and I don't know if I think those dollars went away or just didn't meet it because there wasn't enough people parking there.
You can park in an open field. It doesn't have to be paved.
Exactly. So we will check on them, but thank you. So anyway, that was one of the areas that we looked at with that 250. So that might be one way to get that building fund. So I'm just thinking if we didn't do that building fund for 100.
Yep.
And, the fund balance, we're within the zone, and if our year end gets within the zone, I think with that fund balance, and that transportation, 100 or 200, I think is very feasible for us to fund.
And I think with the
Closer to
fund-
100, but us.
And with the fund balance too, because now that we're closer to that 45%, that it's a much easier, we're not having to make up ground. It's much easier to maintain that incrementally each year with what our increases are. So, yeah, I think we can maintain the fund
Do we
balance.
start at 25,000 to the account, or 40,000, and then 2 or 3 other accounts there? And
We'll start with
go
what
from
we
there,
have.
Yep.
One other little thing that we have not spoken of, but we all know of it, it's kind of the elephant in the room. and that is a decrease in our LGA funding, right? And is that the LGA loss of 87,737?
Yes.
Probably we all know it, but the way LGA is calculated is it's dollars sent back from the state for communities whose housing values are lower than some target number. And because our home values are increasing very quickly relative to certain other parts of the state, that by every formula, we even had our own people who work for us in St. Paul come up and say, we could rework the formula any way we could think of, and by the most favorable way that we rework the formula, you have a loss of local government aid of close to $100,000. Well, that's a line item in our budget. It's a revenue line that we have to make up from 1 year ago. So from 2017 to 2018, that loss of $87,737 is, again, it's a reduction in dollars coming in from the state that we need to make up on a local level. And now we can argue the merits of how wonderful that is and how awful that is. It's wonderful in the fact that people want to live here, and so the demand for housing continues to make housing prices stay strong, and consequently, we lose some of our local government aid. I think it's a good problem to have compared to maybe communities where home values actually are stagnant or dropping a little bit, and that presents much, much bigger problems in all ways, your schools and other funding and whatnot. And so that too, whatever we're doing with the levy, the change in the tax rate has to absorb that amount of almost $100,000 from the state government that we had last year that we do not have this year. Anyone else who wants to say anything about what that means, go for it, but I just thought I'd mention it.
It's one of the items I have circled on mine too, and I was going to mention, you beat me to the punch on that one.
Sorry, bud.
That's all right.
Well,
Looking at the same thing.
The thing with LGA, the two is, again, with the formula for calculating it, it also looks at, you get a credit, or you would look at more favorably the amount of pre-1940 housing that you have in the community, and as you're all well aware, we lost a lot of that in the flood. And it is, LGA is always one of the interesting conversations at the MCMA City Managers Conference, because some of the more rural, smaller farmer communities, like particularly up by the South Dakota border and things like that, they talk about where 50-60% of their budget is LGA, and then you get the ones like Savage and Prior Lake. And LGA, what is that? We don't get any LGA.
Yep.
So basically, we're right now, before we move on to anything else, we're going to look at a creative way, or whatever way we can do this, of stepping up this request of, Carla looking at it, thinking we're fine in the building fund, whatever it may be, and going back and looking at, instead of being 3.5% or 4% increase on the budget, it's more like only going to be like 1 or 2 or whatever it may be. And then, because looking at taking that and the personnel, and there's nothing left for anything, and there's zero. So it's something that maybe we need to look at doing the steps. I don't know if anybody else wants to input on that before we go on and talk about other things, or
Maybe it could go 100,000 then into the transit, long-term local transit. I wouldn't feel too comfortable, say for example, if our reserve fund balance did not change, I would have a little trouble with that, because that you can't sustain like that, because everything does sort of gradually go up. So that should go up at least a little bit. So the bottom line, $20,000 to $50,000 into reserves, and maybe it is 20 to 50 into building fund.
exactly, and that's what, to him, sustaining that 44%, whatever dollar amount, and then then go in looking at this is where I'm getting at.
Perfect. If we can come up with some kind of numbers like that, and then just reflect that as our budget starting point, and then take, I hate to say it, you guys know, take off that loss of 136,823, roll that back in and say, now how do we run our city with those funds no longer considered as part of available funds? I would love to turn our staff loose and see what they can come up with in that environment.
We've already discussed some items, what we could do to do that. We anticipated this, so we've already started to talk about items that we could look at to change. I don't want to offer it up right away, but we've already started that discussion. We knew that was coming.
You don't want to start with your receding on what you want already?
No.
So you can go back, so a number like, take out 137,000, which is the amount that was negative, take out 150,000, which we're saying could go into these several funds, and then come back and see what it looks like.
Okay, I think the building fund we talked about, is that okay? So
So we'll leave it at a 0?
I would think for this year, and then the fund balance for 20 and transportation for 100.
Start with that.
Okay?
That'd be fine.
Everybody okay with that?
As long as I get to, here's what we're going to spend this transportation money on. I don't want to throw money into a fund and lo and behold, come down the line, we're redoing the streets in front of someone's house just because we got money there.
Okay, so speaking of that, I'll just, this is the list I've gotten with, from Steve and Jason, where after we get through the 2018 dollars, and we're actually doing Reinhardt, there was actually a list I gave to you a long time ago.
That'd be Steve Emery.
Anyway, so, yeah, it's not Steve Yo. Okay, so the big item I put on there was 20th Street and Fifth Avenue. So, I mean, that is in front of somebody's houses, so yes, you'd have to have something clear about that, because the city's cost is estimated at $950, and the assessment is at $633,000 for that little neighborhood. What we did, I know we talked about the frontage road out in the industrial park, how that needs to be, the north end needs to be fixed.
Yeah,
And-
I'm not looking at individual projects.
No, I just want to explain to you that these projects will be what we've figured with them, so those are ones we don't need the money for, okay? So, the frontage road, 11th Avenue North, we needed the wastewater replacement. So, the plan is to do that in 2018, fix the wastewater. And then what we're going to do with the paving is that now that a TIF is decertified, we can use those TIF dollars for infrastructure. And since it was in the industrial park, we talked to Paul about thinking that would be a good use of the money, and that would cover the whole project. So I just wanted you all aware of that, to think about that, if that's good use of the money. So that would be a project we don't need money for.
Okay.
Okay? And then, so the only large project is the Bigland Roundabout that we would have to come about if you're looking at streets and transportation, unless there's other big streets in the city besides 20th and 5th.
And however we redo our street replacement policy, there will always be a local share, the way it looks, the way the state of Minnesota operates. Whenever we do a street replacement, and we'll revise that policy, which we have not yet done, there'll be some percentage share to the property owner and to the city. And I'm looking to create a fund balance for that sort of thing, not the onesie-twosie, like 40,000 here and 20,000 there and 10,000 here. Oh, my approach to my driveway is cracked. Not that. So it's really to do the city match on the big projects and to be ready for it versus having to scramble on the backside.
The city match, you're talking when there's federal or state dollars available to do a project, and then there's a city portion that we have to come up with?
And street replacement. You know, we're likely to redo a street replacement policy that calls for some percentage to be a city-borne expense.
Cross that bridge when we get there.
Well, but I mean, to create that fund for these kinds of things.
Because you say it out loud, doesn't mean it's going to happen.
You know, I'll just say this, I'll say this right now. For example, as a roundabout, if we have a $1 million local share and we don't have a fund to pay, I'll veto it.
You didn't veto all the stuff that we're going to be done in 2018.
Correct.
When we didn't have the local share, we had to bond for it.
We can talk to Mr. Emery because we didn't have to
No,
bond
we did
for
not,
it.
we did not bond for
We
it.
did not bond for it.
It came in our state
State
aid fund.
aid.
So my suggestion would be is that say it's $100,000 every year, that we would actually just transfer that $100,000 into our state aid fund. We would actually put it with the state aid we get, which is about $160. So in essence, we'd be, saving $260 a year for those big projects.
We did not bond for the local share for the 2018 federal
Okay,
subtarget.
then we wouldn't have bonded for the local sheriff, we would have done the roundabout then either,
No, we'd have had to come up with cash money.
just as we're doing now.
Well,
Here you're planning ahead versus saying we don't have it. We'll scramble.
well, it's only $461,000 instead of $1 million, because the roundabout, our share is
Okay,
$1 million.
Don't get me wrong, I
No, I
agree
know.
with
Okay.
with the street
Yep.
fund coming in there. There
Yep.
just has to be parameters. If we're gonna
Correct.
use it for the city's share of state or federal dollar matches, I'm okay with that. If we're gonna use it to cover the special assessments on city property when we do street maintenance around town, I'm okay with that. So that's two things I would be okay with.
Well, whatever we use it for will be the decision of the council.
Correct.
So in that
But-
way,
But that parameter needs to be established before the fund gets established.
well, here's the parameter. Whatever we are duly responsible to pay as a city for transportation.
No, that's way too broad, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, we can fill in all the blanks we want. It's going to be exactly what you're saying. But I promise you, in the next 3 to 5 years, we will have a street replacement policy that will call for a local city share.
We'll see how it develops.
Well, we actually have it now, it's just what is the percentage?
Correct. That's what I'm saying.
Right now, it's 100% property. I guess one thing I'd say is, it's, and the reason the assessment policy portion was in there is because of the fact that once we do start getting to the street reconstruction portions of it, there was a discussion about whether the city may have to pick up part of that, whether it's going to be able to be accessible, 100% accessible to the property owners. So that's one of the reasons that we were included in that and looking at that. And what the common practice on this is for the street reconstructions, not state aid streets, but the ones that were outside of state aid streets when they need to be reconstructed, is you go through and you rank them as far as how broken up they are, how what do they call it, the alligator cracked, and what the percentage is, and you rank them by how bad they are, and you try to take as the worst ones and work down with that. It tends to be the common practice, but politics always gets involved in it a little bit.
At this point, for non-state aid streets, we do not have a policy to subsidize properties. It's right now, it's 100% special assessed to the properties, right? And I think that's Clarence's point, is that we don't have a policy in place right now to step in and have a city share of those. And that's, I think, what the mayor is suggesting. We need to come up with a policy, and Clarence is suggesting, bring it on.
I like that discussion. I think there's been some consensus, though. The reason we have not done a street replacement is with our current policy, we can't do it. I mean,
You can. I mean, if the citizens along a street said, I don't want blacktop streets anymore, I want a concrete street, and they get all the citizens to sign a petition, we'd replace their street and charge it to them.
sure, if that happened,
Yeah,
It won't.
not going to happen.
it might.
Cows fly.
Citizens might get upset with their street. I mean, you look on 20th,
Oh, yeah.
and if,
Well, we'll see. But that's all for another
Let's
day.
leave it there.
And I'm, if it's 100% assessed, that's totally fine. If it isn't, but all I'm saying is we don't know, and we're going to have some share in transportation infrastructure. We will, and we should be ready for it.
Well, I'll make one point, and Mark has some questions here. If that's the route we want to go, and I'll say it now, it better have the state stamp on it, because you're creating a citywide district. You're paying for something, and that is totally illegal. So if that's the route we want to go, you better make sure that it's legal.
Oh, yeah, of course, it'll pass through every
Or, let
channel
me-
that it needs to.
I'm not going to say we, but you want to go, because that's something we need to look at, so.
Mark?
Thanks. I have a boatload of things I could add to the street maintenance, but before I get to those, I'll ask a couple questions. First, going back to the tax capacity stuff, when we get our tax capacity, can we ask that they start breaking it, or can we figure out how to break it down between market-based growth and new construction, or can we back out our new construction numbers of that? Because to get to the mayor's point, you know, as you increase number of housing units, as you increase commercial property, industrial property, the cost to the city expands. The cost to the city doesn't expand when your house goes up $10,000 in market value. So I'd like to see over time, and I'm not asking to go backwards, I'm asking to start tracking it going forward, what our tax capacity number is, and then how it breaks out between that market value versus new construction increase. Because I think we should, this is my own thought, but I think we should target our tax levy growth to that new construction, or try to peg it to that in some way, or, you know, plus or minus whatever we have to, but try to match that as close as possible. That's getting to what the mayor's saying is, as we grow, our expenses are growing, or whatever. So I would like to, go ahead.
Well, I guess, again, the assessor's office does keep track of new construction, the market value in the city based on what is new construction. And we should be able to agree with that on that. The issue will be is that typically with new construction, the new construction number amount you'll get from the assessor's office will include any house additions, you know, remodels, things like that. It might not just be specifically new houses, but it'll be any new.
Could we augment it with our own permit data? Like, back out our remodels and
Right now,
whatever.
we keep track of all new construction because we give them a tax abatement if they apply for the $5,000.
Because I would say,
So, but keep in mind now that they don't become full value for at least 3 years typically from the issuance of the permit. So new construction next year would probably be what we built in 2015. But we do keep all of, Paul and Brenda keeps record of that because we have to send that to the city every year for what they receive in tax abatement. So it would be pretty easy for you to see what that is.
and I don't mind whatever method we come to, but I'd like to, if you understand what I'm trying to get at, that's what I'd like us to kind of come up with some sort of a.
And I think the answer is we can probably get that for you. It might not be 100% accurate, but it'll be pretty close.
But at least, and if we decide on that's the metric we're going to use, we can track that over time and we can see how close we're coming to that. And I guess on that capacity number, when did you figure that we would be able to get that? Is it usually not till?
That doesn't
December?
come out till September, and then the truth and taxation comes out in November.
So September,
Yeah.
we will be able to get those numbers.
Yeah, and that's why I included the page from our CAFR on new commercial and residential constructions. So for a guesstimation, if it takes 2 or 3 years, then in 2015, it was $5.5 million. So, we'll just have to come up with a guess.
Right.
And
And
that's why I included, so, well, we could say that hopefully this year it's going to be, 7.9, it went up from that. Or maybe go back a couple years and we can see what the new capacity was and try to figure out where it was.
right. And like I said, there's some gray area in that. Obviously, I believe if a commercial or industrial does renovation and whatever, that could be included because it might drive more employees, more customers, all those type of things. That could add extra cost to the city as well. But I think on a home, just adding market value, I'd like to see that because that can get away from us too, where we can make the claims of, well, our levy isn't directly hitting, we're factoring growth into this levy. Well, if you stop building houses and houses, that should put upward pressure on market value, which now all of a sudden you're taxing people more, even though, you're adding growth, but that growth is on top of existing houses. So it's just one thing. The other thing was what in that number you came up with as a percentage of total revenue, that's 7.45% for personnel. What were the assumptions you used, or were those are those actually calculated out? Like,
Well-
have we run a model of, this is what, moving everybody up a step, and
What I did last year was I actually just took the spreadsheet we were looking for and took out all the other numbers and just from the salaries to salaries, and it was, so it took in effect insurance and all that, and that was at 7.4%. Because the salary spreadsheet that we work off is something Huizenga did. It was very complicated, so I didn't want to take from there to there. I took from actual to actual, and it was at 7.4%.
but
And
we
then-
don't know how many people are at the top step versus, I mean,
No.
or where we are. Okay, so it's
We haven't
somewhat
had-
estimated.
We haven't had the manpower just to even do that. I know Terry herself in HR has said that she doesn't like that spreadsheet. She'd rather do something else, but she hasn't had time to do something else. So that's why when we looked at July now, I just took what we budgeted for total personnel. And what I'll do is I'll go back and see in other years how that affected. So we have some history on that.
Okay,
I can do that.
it would just, yeah, it would be,
Well, I guess the
and then
part-
what other assumptions as far as
We assumed
healthcare
that-
and
we assumed
wages?
We
COSA.
assumed a 2%
COLA, I
cost of
guess.
living. We assumed a maximum 4% of employer contribution for insurance.
2 by 4.
Yeah, so there's 6 right there. So then that
And-
1.4 would be the steps.
But there's also steps and others, okay. And there's no other things that we're being asked to increase, well, we'll see, we got meetings. So, okay, and then as far as street maintenance, and I would agree with Clarence that if we're going to start putting money aside for something, we should have a policy set up. I think we've talked about this. It gets to that number 6, restore trust, or continue trust, or however you want to get to it. If you believe in being trustworthy as a public official, I think that we should have that in place and have it well documented. That could be a huge fight. I foresee a huge fight. I've got a couple battle scars from going through this a number of years ago. Just as some history, though, we did a lot of the heavy lifting that goes into what would take to create that type of policy. And what I mean by that is we've calculated out what the cost is to maintain all the streets in town over a 50-year life cycle, which is, which we figured is a long enough time horizon that you're going to get a couple of recycles or whatever through it. I was trying to look for a lot of it, but I can't find it. But ballpark figures were, it was about $500,000 a year for the city cost to do that at a 30% resident or property investment. So if the property owner is going to put in 30% and the city has to come up with the other 70%, it costs $500,000 a year over 50 years, so come up with $25 million. Total project was about $50 million, but when you back in state aid, federal aid, and various types of other revenues, it ends up being about half is what you would end up paying. So if you want to go down that route, that's about the number you're going to have to hit. And that was 5 years ago, so start ratcheting it up, you'd have to have an inflationary piece to that every year. So if you want to go to something, obviously you can move that number, you can move it down to 20%, you can move it up to 50%, and that would change that number however you want. But just as a ballpark, that's the type of number if you want to get into that type of program. Now, as far as the street district thing is, street district is just for a fee-based process. So if you want to do something on property taxes, you can do whatever you want on property taxes. So I would prefer to do that. I guess it's deductible as compared to what the process we were going before. So what we looked at before is because we weren't going to be allowed, because of the makeup of the council and the mayor, to address it through property taxes. So we had to look at a fee-based process, and we looked at a couple of them, and didn't love any of them, but when you did that, the end, however you got to that 500,000 didn't matter, or it doesn't matter, but you still had to get to that 500,000. So, just so you know, that's what the figure is, if you want to start ramping up a couple years before you got to that, but 500,000 is a lot, but it's something that's doable, so. Other than that, carry on.
You guys have your marching orders as staff?
I think we do.
20 and 100, right?
20, 100, and 136, 823?
Yes, that's a given, sorry.
Clarence, you have something, sir?
I did, just a couple more little items. On the Red River State Recreation Area, the repairs and maintenance went from 8,000 to 65,000 because Public Works is now doing the work orders. So
Yes, and before we actually didn't really have a handle on mowing. We're working on all the mowing.
So my question is, Public Works then should either have revenue coming in at the 57, or their expenses should then decrease by the 57. All you're doing is shifting it from Public Works over to the campground.
Yeah, and what they have done in the past is that they actually put personnel in there, and then what we had to do was come with the hours. So that actually the repairs is the vehicles. So we charge the ENR per hour every time that equipment is on there. We used to have to do that by hand at the end of the year, by how many hours they worked, but now that we're doing work orders, they're going in there immediately. And so whatever the expense in the campground is reflected in revenue. So the 184 there, there's
okay.
184 in our revenue.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's a wash.
Okay.
And it's kind of hard to guesstimate what they're gonna give us for income,
Yep.
so I don't always build that in.
Okay.
So it's a wash.
The second little thing that I was wondering about, if we're sending our sewage over to Grand Forks, are we building that fee into the enterprise fund for 2018 then?
Yes, actually, the way it looks now, the fee, we aren't going to do anything with our fee. In sewage, the rates aren't gonna go up.
No, but for an expense going over to Grand Forks.
Oh, the COSA expense is
Yep.
in the sewage fund. It's already in there.
Did I miss
It's already budgeted in projections. So that is a sewage expense, and that's where it'll go.
Which line item is it then?
I don't think there's not a line item now. We'll make sure that has a separate line item, and we'll call it whatever is best for you to understand. I don't know if you want a GF COSA or something, and we'll put that in as actually it'd be like
So it's not in the sewer operations budget right now?
No,
Okay.
no. And our big, I know, we've worked on those, but our big thing was the general fund because of the levy.
Yep,
but-
yep.
Yep. And I don't know if we have a new number on the COSA, so I don't really know what that for sure is, if there's, when everything's said and done, if we actually have until we get that strict number, we'll put that in a separate line item. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Anybody else have any other questions?
Mark?
Back to personnel. Are we at full staff currently?
It depends on what you call full staff.
Well, I mean,
Well,
in the last couple of years, we've had positions that have either been carried on, or they were vacant, we didn't fill them, or, we had some carryover in different department head positions and different stuff. Are we right now, do we have all the positions filled, or are we overlapped on any?
In Public Works, we're, even with the truck driver, if we hire another one, we get assuming we move Jeff up, we'll still technically be one short for truck driver. If you remember not last winter, but the winter before, we hired a seasonal to try to fill that position in the wintertime, so we decided not to fill it permanently, but now we can't do that anymore.
And then in Parks, when Deb retired, the council decided not to.
So how many FTEs do we have right now?
So We just
Not
have the one.
including, not like adding up all the part-time work.
So we actually just have a truck driver one that's being announced, right? And then the truck driver one from a couple years ago.
Right, but total FTEs.
You know what our total number is? Well, I think you're saying, what do we have for FTEs?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
In the
We
city?
have 90.
90?
That includes water and light. And there's, I think, 26, so,
That sounds about.
Does it include officers we're waiting and looking to hire?
yes. I forgot about those positions, because we keep filling those, but yeah. Last year, we had, it's closer to 89, so that would be 63. You take the 26 off.
And then, what was there any analysis of the effect of changing the structure of the finance tech position between water and light?
And maybe Keith can answer that, but it's going very well.
But as far as fiscal, I guess, analysis.
But,
I mean, I know the partnership or the arrangement is going well. As far as funding that position, it's 100% funded by the water and light.
Perfect.
well, they used to reimburse us for finances of 18,000 a year. They're not doing that. So that's something that revenue that we haven't had this last year.
Okay. I just looking at, if you look at the biggest mover of our budget, or our expenses is personnel, we need to maybe take a look and see if there's other things. I don't want to fire people, I don't want to not give them raises and other things like that, but if you don't look at your biggest issues.
And we continue to look at ways to do things smarter and not harder, and with the people we have.
I know that Parks and Rec is currently going through that right now. I'm sure if you want to share any of that.
I guess, thank you. In light of hearing everything tonight and where we have to be, obviously, I'd like the opportunity to go back and look at what we're asking for too. But coming into this meeting, if you read through the packet, one of the things we're looking at is trying to add Deb's position back, that administrative assistant, not necessarily as an administrative assistant, kind of a specialist position where they'd fill some of that admin assistant role, and at the same time be able to offer more to us from a park recreation standpoint. The other part of it, kind of looking at restructure, of course, Mr. Gulbranson is retiring from the VFW arena. So that gives us an opportunity too to look at a little differently, what are we doing across the board. I'm not sure if I'm ready at this moment to share anything specifically as to what I'm hoping to do there. Just in light of having some more conversation with the staff that we have. I haven't discussed even a few of the changes I'd like to see there with them in thorough yet. But looking at how we can work more efficiently maybe doesn't necessarily mean that we'd reduce any employees or look to reduce any employees, but certainly be able to look at our full-time group and say how can we work more efficiently and hopefully in the long run reduce some of that part-time staff hours. That's about the best I could share for now.
Anybody else have any questions at this time?
I do.
Mayor?
When do we get to do this again?
Oh, it's got so much fun. It's Friday.
So your timeline is, as you look forward here, what do you want out of the council to meet again? Timeline to meet with your staff, your department heads, and knowing that in September we'll have some numbers, then where do you want to be?
Well, we've set the meeting for September 19th, vote on what the preliminary levy will be. So I would suggest we come back with changes from that, maybe the work session before that.
Yeah, that's the work session. Because again, we're setting we can finalize it.
The 12th, yeah. So we'll come back with numbers with you like this for the 12th, and then we'll vote on the preliminary levy and then.
If I could kind of as a question, and I know members of the community are watching also, and I hope to each of the department heads who are going to go forward and run your departments as efficiently as you can, we can apologize in advance because there will be a little bit of head scratching and a little bit of pencil pushing and trying to trying to make it all fit together. But I hope you can see that we have to kind of top out at that gross levy increase of 10%, asking each family to come up with, say, a little less than 5% increase from one year to the next. I hope you guys are okay with what we're doing, and even to the point of wanting to be responsible to create these funds for the commitments coming up for the city. I know Mr. Murphy, Ms. Anderson, and all of our department heads are asking you to do some good work, and we know you're capable of it. So thank you for that, and to the citizens that see these kind of numbers. I hope you see also the belt tightening that everybody will go through to make this budget come together. I think we all do our best work in a slightly lean environment, just slightly lean, where we're kind of always looking toward, is there a way to do this with excellence and yet cut out the fat, right? Just excellent results, but no waste. If we're all kind of oriented to that, that's a good way to go at it.
Okay, anybody else have anything? If not, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Pachivinsky.
Second.
Second by Vetter. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.